Have you ever wondered what human flesh and blood tastes like? Well, for a befitting answer, you can ask Geoffrey Njoroge Matheri, aka the Naivasha vampire. Geoffrey Matheri hit the headlines in Kenya in the year 2008 after two women were rescued from his house in Kihoto Estate, Naivasha, where they had been illegally confined and badly tortured. After his arrest, Matheri confessed to having killed an uncountable number of people in Naivasha, drank their blood, and ate some of their body parts. Welcome to the Insight Edition. My name is Yusuf, and on today's episode of Criminal Diaries, I'm going to tell you the chilling story of the Naivasha vampire and how, because of a shoddy prosecution, he went unpunished for most of his crimes. Not much is known about Geoffrey Matheri's childhood, although in one of his interviews, he claims that he was born in Nakuru, and at a tender age, both his parents died and left him with his brother and sister. After the tragedy, they had to relocate to Kinangop, where they stayed with their uncle. Life at Kinangop was very tough. He says that his uncle used to mistreat them. When the situation worsened, Matheri dropped out of school, left Kinangop, and became a street boy in Naivasha. Some time passed while he was still a street boy in Naivasha, and one day, a man approached them while they were at their base inhaling gum. The man, who he identified as Bishop Jeremiah Palanjo of the New Hope for All Nations Church, asked who among them was ready to have a better life, leave the streets, go build their own house, and even marry. Matheri claims that among all who were present, he accepted the offer. He left with the bishop and then got to live with him for a month. It was within this month of staying together that the bishop explained to Matheri what was the task at hand, and that was to kill people. If they were female, he had to chop off their breasts, and if they were male, he had to chop off their privates, drain their blood, and afterward deliver those specified parts and blood to the bishop. On the 9th of August 2008, at about 7:30 p.m., Naomi Wanjiru, a resident of Naivasha, was going to the shop like she had done many times before. After passing 2 blocks from her residence, 2 street boys appeared in front of her. They proceeded to greet her and continued going to the direction behind her. After a while, another 2 appeared. The 2 who had passed her earlier on started to return, and before she could even say a word, she was in the middle of the 4. The street boys proceeded to kidnap her and deliver her to Geoffrey Matheri. Matheri proceeded to take Naomi to his house. On entering the house, the faint sound of someone crying and asking for help could be heard. This is when Naomi discovered that she was not alone in the house. There was another lady who she would later identify as Esther Akinyi. Esther, a 16-year-old girl, had been abducted and illegally confined in the house by Matheri. She had been in the house for several days. Naomi was commanded to join Esther on the bed, and Matheri came and spent the night in between the 2. On the days that followed, Naomi will witness unspeakable terrors taking place in that room. On a particular day, she saw Matheri biting off flesh from Esther's back and then stabbing Naomi and drawing her blood into a cup. He then ate the flesh and drank the blood like one will eat bread and down it with tea. This is a picture of Esther's back that was taken after she had been rescued. You can see the deep bite marks that were inflicted by Matheri. Can we just take a moment and imagine how sick and twisted someone will have to be to do something like this? Naomi said that one time, Matheri used a syringe to draw blood from her body, then pour it into 3 soda bottles. Then he took them with him very late in the night. You see, the unspeakable actions of Geoffrey Matheri will have gone unnoticed and unpunished if not for the badly wounded Esther Akinyi, who gathered up enough strength and escaped straight into the hands of the residents on the 14th of August 2008. After rescuing her, the residents started to shout and scream, and when Naomi heard those sounds, she began to be hopeful about the possibilities of her rescue and freedom. But it seems like Madheri was not done with her yet, because he took her outside the house near the borehole, where he had dug a hole which he told her that it was to be her grave. Then he commanded her to make her last prayers and ask God to receive her soul. He then took her to the corner of the plot and made her to lie down where he had placed a big stone. His plan was to chop off her head. Naomi says that at that time she was just wishing for him to do it, since she was tired of all that was happening. Madheri stabbed her, but was kind of unable to cut her. When Naomi opened her eyes next, she was surrounded by sobbing relatives, medical personnel attending to her, media cameras and crew. She explained that whatever had happened was a miracle, because if the rescuers had been even 10 seconds late, they will not have found her alive. When she was rescued, Naomi was already turning gray and her wounds were not even bleeding. She seemed to be already dead. On the other hand, Esther was already rotting. Maggots were coming out of her wounds. After the rescue of both Naomi Wanjiru and Esther Akinyi, both investigations and the manhunt for Geoffrey Madheri began. When the houses were searched, the police recovered blood-stained mattresses, school uniforms for girls, whips, among other items. The decomposing body of a woman was also found buried in a shallow grave in the same house. The body was taken to Naivasha District Hospital, where investigations to determine who it belonged to and what circumstances had led to her death began. Geoffrey Madheri was arrested on the following day, the 15th of August 2008, from a hotel in Naivasha. Madheri confessed to have killed a lot of people, most of whom were men. He said that he will proceed to drain out some of their blood and amputate some body parts before disposing of their bodies. Madheri claimed that he was committing these murders because he had been sent on a mission by Bishop Jeremiah Palanjo of the New Hope for All Nations Church. Bishop Jeremiah Palanjo was arrested thereafter. Unsurprisingly, he denied every single word that had come out of Madheri's mouth about the recruitment. After investigations, he was released since nothing could link him to the crimes committed by Geoffrey Madheri. On the 3rd of September 2008, Geoffrey Madheri was first arraigned in court. Madheri was charged with 4 counts of rape and assault. Sadly, 4 years later, a Naivasha court acquitted him of the rape and assault charges because of the failure to produce enough evidence by the prosecution. Madheri was, however, convicted for the lesser crime of illegal confinement, to which he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. He served his time at Naivasha Maximum Security Prison. Geoffrey Madheri was also charged with the murder of the woman whose body had been found badly decomposing in a shallow grave in a room that was alleged to be his. The investigators identified the body to be belonging to Miriam Wairimu. The trial for this case began on the 6th of June 2013. The murder case of Miriam Wairimu was lengthy and had a very unsatisfying conclusion. When the autopsy of the body was done, it was discovered that the big toe and the first toe on the right foot was amputated. There was an incision on her left wrist joint. There was a penetrating stab wound on the right pelvis. There was a deep incisive wound on the right thumb. The left nipple head was ripped off. There was a penetration stab wound on the left breast. There was a cut wound around the left nipple. Internal examination of the body showed that the left ribcage and the left lung had been perforated. The cause of her death was ruled out to be hemorrhage due to multiple cut and stab wounds. In the case, it was evident the prosecution could not prove that the corpse really belonged to Miriam Wairimu. You see, in murder cases, unless the death of a person in respect to whom the accused was charged is proved beyond reasonable doubt, the accused may be convicted for the murder of a person yet alive, and this is highly avoided. In the murder case of Miriam Wairimu, there was no proof that the female remains actually belonged to Miriam Wairimu. The deceased could not be linked to any relatives. No one was called to confirm that she was actually missing or dead. No death certificate or burial permit was produced in court as evidence. In short, there was nothing to prove that Miriam Wairimu was actually dead and the remains were hers. The prosecution failed to prove the fact that Miriam Wairimu, the alleged victim in the case, was actually dead, and on that ground alone, the charge would have failed. It was also evident that the prosecution relied on three main factors in order to impute guilt on the part of the accused. Number 1, a confession made by Geoffrey Matheri. Number 2, the recovery of the body buried inside a house said to belong to Geoffrey Matheri. Number 3, the conviction of Geoffrey Matheri for the abduction and rape of two other women, that is Naomi Wanjiru and Esther Akinyi. With regards to the confession, the law clearly provides in Section 25A of the Evidence Act the circumstances in which a confession may be admitted as evidence in court. Section 25A(1) provides that a confession or any admission of a fact tendering to the proof of guilt made by an accused person is not admissible and shall not be proved as against such person unless it is made in court before a judge, a magistrate, or before a police officer other than the investigating officer, being an officer not below the rank of Chief Inspector of Police, and a third party of the person's choice. The recording of the confession video certainly involved Geoffrey Matheri giving self-incriminatory evidence in violation of his rights as guaranteed by Article 50 of the Kenyan Constitution 2010, which states that every accused person has the right to a fair trial, which includes the right to refuse to give out self-incriminating evidence. Such evidence is not admissible unless the accused had first been properly warned and had, following such a warning, made an informed decision to waive that right. This was not done by the person who recorded the confession in this case. Therefore, due to the illegal nature of the confessions, the court could not impute guilt on Geoffrey Matheri regarding the murder of the deceased. With regards to the body being found buried in the house of Geoffrey Matheri, the prosecution could not really prove that he was the occupant of that house, since the plot had 4 houses, 1 that he occupied and 3 others were vacant. It was also noted that there was no eyewitness who saw Matheri burying the deceased in that particular house. So, if the body was not recovered inside the house occupied by Geoffrey Matheri, how could he be held responsible for the presence of a dead body inside a vacant house, especially since nobody saw him bury the body there? Matheri could not be implicated due to the recovery of a body in a house not occupied by himself. It was also discovered that Geoffrey Matheri was being accused based on suspicions because he had been arrested, tried, and convicted in a Naivasha court for the abduction and rape of 2 women. The fact that Matheri may have been involved in the abduction and assault of other women was not proof that he had murdered the deceased. In order to prove its case, the prosecution had to produce tangible evidence linking Geoffrey Matheri to the body. Sadly, the scientific forensic report after DNA sampling was done did not link Matheri to the deceased woman in any way. There were possibilities that the deceased may have been murdered by persons other than Geoffrey Matheri and her remains buried in that house. The owner of that house where the body was recovered remained unknown. The fact that Matheri was tried and convicted of other similar offenses in a Naivasha court was not proof of his involvement in the murder. At least, the evidence leads to suspicion that Matheri may have killed the deceased, but as stated in the Sawe case, suspicion, no matter how strong, cannot form the basis for a finding of guilt. Since the prosecution failed to prove the charge of murder to the standard required by law, Geoffrey Matheri was acquitted on the murder charges by Judge Maureen Odero of the Nakuru High Court on the 29th of July 2016, and afterwards he was freed. To conclude, Geoffrey Matheri spent 8 years in prison. After his release in 2016, he said that he had been saved by Christ and wanted to go spread his gospel. On the beginning of this episode, I had asked you, what do you think human flesh and blood tastes like? Let Geoffrey Matheri, the Naivasha vampire himself, give us his answer.
Si kama ya mayai, yenye tu unaweza kula mayai. Kuna kachumvi kidogo.
Do you think the court made the right decision when they released Geoffrey Matheri back into the streets? That's it for today. Thank you for watching. See you on the next one.